Camping with teenagers is an adventure. If you've ever camped with teenagers, you know it is an adventure. And now I've camped with teenagers in the woods, but I've also camped at the beach. And I want to tell you about one particular story where I camped with some teenagers out at Cape Lookout, where the lighthouse is. And did you know that you can have raccoons on a secluded island? It's true. I learned. You can have raccoons at a secluded island. I guess they swim from the mainland. I don't know. But they're brave. They're bold. I had a bunch of chaperones. I got together a thing with my church and a bunch of other churches. I had a bunch of chaperones, and these raccoons were brave. One of them was rushing into the campsite, so one of my brave chaperones, he saw that raccoon coming, jumped at it. That's scary. The raccoon jumped at him. The raccoon won. It's important where you set your tent. It's better if you set your tent a little bit close to the fire. The animals don't tend to get close to that. We had guys and girls on this trip. So we put the guys on one side in their tents, and we put the girls on the other side in their tents. I don't have to tell you why that's important, where you set your tent. We also had this rule: no food inside of your tent. Absolutely no food. I mean, not even a crumb. Now, why do you think it might be important not to put food in your tent? It's because of those raccoons. So we had these three particular girls that typically thought the rules did not apply to them. Those are for the lesser beings. Those rules don't apply to us. So they snuck some food into their tent. And so not long after, a raccoon snuck into their tent. Now in hindsight, it's really funny to remember how they tore apart that tent trying to get out of there. And so they had no tent. Oh, it was irreparable. So they ended up having to sleep outside on the sand on blankets. And now you might be saying, well, Pastor Travis, that doesn't sound that bad. Sleeping underneath a lighthouse on the beach on some blankets with the starlight and the moonlight. That's great. No, it's not. You want to be inside the tent because there's mosquitoes. And particularly at night, that's when all the ghost crabs come out. So they got no sleep. It's important when your leader gives you some direction about what not to put in your tent to listen to them. And it's important where you pitch your tent. If they had pitched a little bit closer to the fire as they had been instructed, perhaps they still wouldn't have had this problem. It's important to listen to God's direction, where He guides us, where He would have us pitch our tent. And not to have anything in that tent that does not belong there. Even if the rules don't make sense to you, those directions are for your good, and they're there for a reason. There was once this man named Abram, and he had a wife named Sarai. Now later on in their story, their names are changed by God to Abraham and Sarah. Now in the scriptures we're going to read today, they're Abram and Sarai. But you may hear me call them Abraham and Sarah. So I don't want to confuse you. If you hear Abraham and Sarah, it's Abram and Sarai. It's the same people. It's just for the sake of clarity. Now we're going to read about them a lot in Genesis chapter 12. But before we get into Genesis chapter 12, I want us to backtrack. Because some time ago, we read about this couple in Genesis chapter 11. We were introduced to them. And we learned that Abraham, or Abram at that point, Abram's father, Terah, picked up his family, and they headed towards the land of Canaan. Now, if you know a little bit further on in the story, you know that would become the Promised Land. Now, they probably didn't realize that at the time, but that would become the Promised Land. So, Abram's father, Terah, grabs up Abram and his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot, his son, Haran, and they all head out to the land of Canaan. But they stop on the way there. Terah cuts the trip a little bit short. There's this land that's name means something to the effect of a rest for the weary traveler. And that's where they stop. They stop in the land of the rest for the weary traveler. They say, good enough. This is where we will pitch our tent. We'll pitch our tent here a little bit short of the land of Canaan. Well, one of Terah's sons passes away there. That's where he dies. And so he leaves behind a son named Lot. which would be Abraham and Sarah's nephew. And eventually, Terah passes away as well. So all that is left is Abraham and Sarah and their nephew Lot. And one more detail that we get in Genesis chapter 11 before we move away from there is that they have no children of their own because Sarah cannot have children. So that brings us over to chapter 12. At this point, Abram is 75 years old and Sarai is 65. Now, I know when some people get to a certain age, they retire and they buy a camper. I met lots of people who will buy a camper and they say, our dream has been during our retirement that we are going to travel around the United States. We're going to see the country. But they always have a home to go back to. You're going to go out, you're going to travel, you're going to come back, you're going to have a home to go back to. I have known people who have sold that home, though. I've known people, especially back when I worked in Beaufort out by the ocean, I've known people who sold their homes and they bought a houseboat. And they would travel north and south, and we would usually see them around Thanksgiving. They would come for a Thanksgiving meal. But they would travel north and south dependent upon the seasons. Now, I have personally never stayed overnight in a camper, and I've never stayed overnight in a houseboat. But I've seen some of them. They're really neat. I'm amazed by the modern conveniences that you can put in a camper or a houseboat. You can have satellite TV, you can have heat and air, you can have plumbing of a sort. You have all of these modern conveniences when you want to travel. But Abram and Sarai, they didn't have any of that. They didn't have any of those conveniences. They have accumulated things. They have wealth, they have servants while they were staying in Haran. But travel through the desert would probably be a little difficult for this couple in their 60s and 70s. And anyone who has ever moved knows what it's like to move. It's a hard thing to move, especially when you get married and things accumulate over time. So Abram and Sarai have to take all of the stuff that has accumulated over the years of their marriage, and they have to move it across the desert in their 60s and 70s. And I'm sure Abram has his 3 boxes of clothes, and Sarai has her 15 crates of shoes, and they're traveling through the desert, and how hard that must be. Now, things were probably cozy in Haran. They were probably people of great influences. The things that we know about Abram's character, they were probably people of great influence. I bet they had friends and neighbors who knew who they were. They were on good terms with them. Maybe they had plans to grow old together. Maybe their plan had been, we're going to sit in the rocking chair on the front porch and hold hands. We're going to grow old together. There's nothing wrong with that. That's beautiful. They were going to enjoy those golden years together in peace. But that's not the plan that God had for them. God had other plans. He wasn't done with them yet. Now, some people have told me over time that once they retired, they were more busy than when they were working. And a lot of times doing a lot of things for God, and people have said the phrase to me, I don't know how I ever had time for work. Well, Abram and Sarai, they're about to get really busy in their 60s and 70s. They're about to up and move. They're going to leave their comfort zones. So let's look at the text here in Genesis chapter 12, starting with the first verse. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abraham set out and continued toward the Negev. Now, this is one of the first instances that we have in the Bible of this faith of Abraham that is now on display. So he's not in his 20s anymore, but when he hears the command, he goes. Now, let's paraphrase this just a little bit, just for emphasis' sake. Abram, I want for you and your wife and your nephew to leave the lands of your fathers, to leave the land of the familiar and the comfortable, and go to a place that I'll talk to you about later. Which you would expect Abram's response to be, well, God, where are we going? Well, I'll tell you when we get there. Let's go. Pack up your stuff. Let's go. And Abram just simply says, okay. And he goes. Now, if you look at the bookends of the story, the Lord commands Abram to go, and he does. But not only that, but God makes some incredible promises to Abram. 7 promises, in fact. Promises that are so impossible that only God could do them. This is going to be not only a testament to the faith of God, but the faithfulness of God, but the faith of Abraham. That he's going to do things that only could be explained as happening by God. And you'll see inside your notes, we've listed these out. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing, which means you will be seen as blessed. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. All peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. So God makes these incredible promises. And if you look at the context of these promises, you'd say, a lot of these, most of these, especially that first one, could not occur unless Abram has a son. Because you can't have a nation of one person. Even if you count the rest of his family, you can't have a nation of 3 people. So God must be bringing Abram a son. And that's going to be fleshed out later in the later promises by God. But how is that going to happen? How is God going to make that happen? Abram and Sarai, they have no children. They have no grandchildren. They have Lot, their nephew, but he's not going to be their descendant, so to speak. So Abram and Sarai, they have all of these possessions. They have all of this wealth. They have all of these servants, but they would gladly give up all of that if they just had a son. They would gladly give away all of that just to have a son, to pass down that legacy through somebody. Now, if we break down the promises of God, these 7 promises, and if we paraphrase these, you could say them sort of like, I'm going to give you a son, more wealth than you have now, and renown amongst all of the nations. Everyone, when they see you, they're going to know that you've been blessed by God. And they will bless you too. And if they curse you, I'll curse them. And your life before me, Abram, will be so exemplary as a God follower that other people, when they see your example of what it's like to be a God follower, when they follow that example, they will come to that relationship with God too. Even the outsiders. And that's the last part, is the part that should really perk up our ears. That even the outsiders are going to be included inside of this. All the nations, even the outsiders. Not just people from Abram's bloodline. Here's this promise that there's going to be this bloodline, there's going to be this covenant promise from God to Abram. It's going to go through his bloodline, but it's not just his bloodline. That this promise is open to other people who will have that saving relationship with God, that kind of relationship with God that Abram had. We'll get back to that later. In verse 6, Abram, he travels to the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. And the Lord appears to Abram and tells him that his descendants will be given this land from God. And Abram builds an altar there. He worships God. And at this point, he sets up camp, which tells us that he's been traveling this whole time. He has not yet set up camp. Now's the time when he has to pitch his tent. He has to decide where is he going to pitch his tent. And he's following God's direction, and he has to make a decision now. So we see in verse 8 that he pitches his tent with Bethel on the west of him, and Ai on the east. Now, why in the world is that significant? When I was in college, there was one particular semester in college that was incredibly easy. I didn't have a lot of classes to take, so I was just taking elective credits. So I took a class in interpreting film. So that semester, I sat with my friends at lunch, and then I hung around for a little while to eat with another group of friends. I went to my car and took a nap, and then I went and watched a movie. I know, killer semester, right? Just really working hard there. So it was the easiest semester. But I did learn something in that class. that when you watch a movie, you have these set designers, you have these costume people, these prop masters, that they have laid out everything in the scene for a specific reason. If you're watching a movie and somebody's sitting at a desk and it's messy, or if it's tidy, well, there's a reason for that. It didn't get there. Somebody put it there. They put all of the things on that desk to communicate something about the character. If you watch the old Star Trek episodes, what happens when somebody was wearing a red shirt? It wasn't a mistake. The guy in the red shirt always died. Every time. There are things when we watch TV and movies that there are details that are shared for very specific reasons to move the plot along and to tell you something important. And it's not there by accident. Someone made a deliberate decision to put these things there. So I'm reminded when I look at this story, this place where Abraham pitches his tent, there's a reason that we're told that location. It's not just random. That detail in the story is told to us for a reason. So Bethel means house of God. So that represents the relationship that Abraham had with God. He has this relationship with God over here. And Ai represents the world, the sinful world. It's over here to the east. And so Abram sets down his tent in between God and the people. And Abram himself will be a channel through which that blessing goes from God to the people. He's positioned strategically. Now, if you remember the earlier chapters of Genesis, the east usually had a negative connotation. When Adam and Eve were exiled, they went east of the garden. When Cain kills Abel, he wanders off to the east. And here in this passage, Abram keeps his relationship with God in the proper place, and he keeps all the negative influences of the world to the east of him, in its proper place, off to the side. He raises an altar to the Lord, he calls on the name of the Lord, and then he sets back out on the road again. So let's skip ahead in the story just a little bit to chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had departed from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. So given the chance of anywhere to live, Lot pitches his tent towards the most wicked city that he can find. He picks the best for himself, or at least he thinks that he has picked the best for himself, somewhat selfishly. And Abram is returning to the scene where God first gave him the blessing. He's calling once again on the name of the Lord. And he's trying to be the bigger person. He's trying to sort this out. Lot, you pick whatever you want. I'll just take the leftovers. You choose whatever you want. I'll just go the other way. And Lot chooses selfishly. He parks right up beside temptation. He gets as close as he can. And notice that God immediately blesses Abram, but he doesn't bless Lot. Now, aren't we sometimes like Lot. I'm going to get mine. I've got to look out for number one. I got to take care of me. I got to do me. No one else is going to take care of me. So we selfishly try to grab and we try to take, not that we've earned it. If anyone had earned the best of the best, it was righteous Abram. But love does not demand its own way. We read in 1 Corinthians 13:5. And Abram is graciously giving up what he could really just take for himself. We are a lot like Lot. Lot looks out over the plain and he sees these wicked cities. He says, I know these people over here are bad, but I'm just going to park right up next to them. I'm not like these wicked people. I don't live there. I'm going to live right next to it. I'm going to inch up. And later we read that he's actually in Sodom at that point. I'm not going to drink the whole cup of the wrath of God, but let me have just a little sip. Let me drink down a little bit of this poison. These things that I know are bad for me in my life, that are toxic to my faith, let me take in just a little bit, just a little bit. I'm not like those other people who take more. I'm good, I'm righteous because I've only consumed a little bit of this sin. I've towed the line right up to the line. We're taught in Scripture to flee from temptation, but sometimes we cozy and cuddle up right next to it, don't we? So what happens to Lot? The man who pitches his tent right next to the most wicked place that he could find. He's in the wrong place at the wrong time when God decides to punish these wicked cities. In Genesis 14, he gets captured in a war. And Abram swoops in and rescues his nephew Lot. In Genesis 18 and 19, Sodom and Gomorrah are about to be destroyed, and Lot is living at that point in Sodom. Abram pleads with God, please save my nephew Lot and his family. And God does. He sends 2 angels to get them out of the city before he destroys it. Now I want you to notice that in both instances, Abram is in a position to help. Abram is in a position to save, to intercede before God for his loved ones, because he's where he's supposed to be. He's doing what he's supposed to do. It's because of where he pitched his tent that he's in a position to help others. It matters where you pitch your tent. Now we mentioned earlier this last promise that God made to Abram, that all over the world people would be blessed through him. Now that does not mean that people would call upon the name of Abram and be saved. No, only in the name of the Lord can we call upon and be saved. What this means here is that Abram is such an example of a God follower that people can follow his example. They can use him as a model and get into a salvific relationship with God. And it's not just for the bloodline. Anyone can follow that example. The Apostle Paul speaks about this in Romans chapter 11. And I've included much of that chapter in your notes. We're not going to read all of it, but I encourage you to read that later. It's really good. Paul explains the detail throughout, but I want to highlight just a few sections. In verse 13, Paul says, I'm talking to you Gentiles, which means not just for those people in that time period. It means he's talking to us because we're the Gentiles. Gentile means you're not of the bloodline of Abram. Anybody who's not in that bloodline, you're a Gentile. So Paul, in a sense, kind of jumps out of these pages and points the fingers and says, hey, I'm talking to you. This applies to you. So that should grab our attention. In verses 17 through 24, Paul explains that Israel is symbolized by an olive tree. They're rooted in a relationship with God that goes way back to the beginning, way back to these early patriarchs. And who was the first one? Abram, who becomes Abraham. Paul says that we did not grow up as part of this tree that's nourished by God. That we grew up as some kind of branch from something else. But as unnatural as it sounds, God grafts us in. He grabs us and nourishes us and makes us part of this tree that we weren't part of, but he makes us part of this tree. What's amazing to me is if you look at patterns in Scripture, you may have heard me say before, when you see a pattern in Scripture, it's telling you something. So at the very beginning of Genesis, we see God planted a garden in Eden. He didn't just speak and it became. He speak and a lot of things happened. But when we read about creation, God physically plants a garden in Eden. God has a plan for the Jews and he's wanting to save them. But he's waiting until the very last of the outsiders is saved before he comes back. In verse 25 of Romans, I do not want to be ignorant of this mystery. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. Now, during his earthly ministry, Jesus shared a parable about the owner of a vineyard who comes up and he sees this fig tree. And he talks to the worker in the vineyard. He says, you see this fig tree, it's not producing any figs. It's not producing any fruit. It's worthless to me. It's taking up space and resources and soil. Why are we wasting our time on it? Chop it down. But the worker in the vineyard says, no, please, in verse 8 of Luke 13, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down. You see, Jesus is the gardener in that parable. He's lovingly nourishing that tree. He's helping it to grow, not willing to cut it down until he absolutely has to. Jesus wants to save the Jewish people because of his love for Abraham and for his covenant promise to him and his descendants. And he also wants to save us, who are spiritual successors to Abraham, who have been grafted into that same tree. Now, I love this little detail in John chapter 20, verses 11 through 18. At this point, Jesus has went to the cross to pay the ultimate penalty for our sins. He's been dead and buried, but he is resurrected from the dead. He is risen again, which verifies his mission from the Father God is legitimate. So he has resurrected. He is no longer in the tomb. And Mary Magdalene comes to his tomb, and she finds that the stone has been rolled away, and inside the tomb is empty. And she's crying at this point. She doesn't know what has happened. What has happened to my Savior's body? Because he should be dead in this tomb. And she's crying, and she turns around, probably with tears blurring her vision, and Jesus is standing there in the garden. And what she does, she thinks she's talking to the gardener. And I love the irony of that because, in a sense, she's not wronged. There is Jesus who went to the cross for our sins, who died and rose again, who reconciles us to God, and he's in the garden, fulfilling his mission. He's nourishing that tree. He's grafting you and I into it. He's accomplishing his mission. He's fulfilling his promise to Abraham, who long ago obeyed and left his comfort zone and pitched his tent on the promises of God. Now, I want you to think about the legacy that you leave based upon where you pitch your tent. To what has God called you? What promises lay untapped? What riches of mercy and provision? What destiny might God be calling you to? Now, I don't want you to dare start thinking, yeah, but that was Abraham. As Abraham, I couldn't possibly have a relationship with God like Abraham. God's not going to call me to do anything epic or noteworthy. Don't say that. How could you possibly know? Unless you listen to what God calls you to. And you obey. And you embark out there. And you do what it is that God has laid in your heart. You pitch your tent upon his promises, wherever those might be. What has God promised to all of us? We see in John 14:12. Jesus says to his disciples, not just to his disciples, but he's saying to all of us in the present day, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I'm going to the Father. Now, I want you to try and wrap your mind around that just for a moment. Do greater things than Jesus Christ. How in the world could we do greater things than Jesus Christ? But he said it, and he means it. And it's by the will of God that we could do even greater things. That seems unbelievable, doesn't it? But I'll give you an example of something else that Jesus said. In Mark 11, verse 22, have faith in God, Jesus answered. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. So the prayer, prayed in faith, in concert with God's will, not our selfish wants, but the will of God, is powerful enough to move mountains. And we'll give you an example of somebody who believed that. Peter believed that. You remember the story of the woman who grabbed Jesus' cloak and she was healed. Well, in Acts 5:15, we read about Peter. As a result, people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. It is incredible to see how God was using Peter, even after Jesus had ascended back up into heaven, how God was using Peter in that moment. He can use you the same way. As impossible as it might sound, God is faithful to his promises. And it sounds crazy to think that we could do miracles like Jesus. But those who believed have proved his promises true. It seems crazy to believe that a couple in their 60s and 70s could have a child and birth a nation. But it was true. God's promises are true and trustworthy. So what promises has he spoken into your heart? What seems crazy and impossible that God has called you to do that you can only do with his help? Now, it would be easier to stay in your comfort zone. It might even be easier to find the most wicked place and park your tent right up next to that. Following God into the unknown can be frightening. But I promise you, there is no better place to pitch your tent than upon the promises of God. So this morning, as we start off the new year, I invite you to pitch your tent wherever God leads you. Believe that God still moves mountains. I'd love to pray with you. I'd love to invite you to join this church and to pitch your tent alongside other fellow campers who are simply trying to follow God's will too. So maybe you're new to Rock Creek Baptist, and if so, welcome. I want to remind you we have a class to explain of what it means to become a Christian and become a member here, and that meets at 9:30 in the office. Maybe you're ready now to join. Don't let Satan hold you down. Pitch your tent where God leads. Now, maybe you've been attending for years and not joined. You say, I've been attending for years. I don't really see a need to join. I don't understand why we would do that. And we love having you as a visitor. If you've been visiting for some time, we love having you as a visitor, and I don't want to take anything away from you. We love having you. But I want you to think about, this is a crazy metaphor, but I want you to think about maybe a relationship that you have been in, or you know of someone that's had this relationship where you were dating for a while. You dated, and you dated, and you dated. And you didn't really commit to that person. You say, hey, things are great. I don't want to change anything. Things are great. And the other person says, yes, things are great, but I want more. I want you to commit to this relationship. I want to know that you're there, that you're committed. I want you to express your love publicly and declare that we're part of the family. Well, if you've been visiting for a while, we love to have you. There's certainly no pressure. But if you feel like part of the family, why not make it official this morning? Why not join the church? Why not set off the new year in that way? And not just for yourself and your relationship with the people of God, but for others. Because if other people see you pitch your tent here, that might convince them that they might also want to join this family of faith as well. So for yourself, but also for your family, for your friends, it matters where you pitch your tent. Won't you please come forward as God leads you as we sing this final song.